The very first question I was asked this morning when I got to church was, are you postponing the series again? Because there's snow on the ground. And no, we're going forward with the series today. There is snow on the ground, and I'm done with it already. We had our snow day. It was fun. It was great. It's over. No more snow. We can be done with it. It's softball season. It's time to warm up. So, but unfortunately, I think we got a lot more of this cold stuff here. But we are going to kick off this series today because this is kind of, I would describe this as a highly anticipated series just because of the feedback I've been getting before the series. And that's unusual because I've preached here for 20 years. You've pretty much heard everything I have to say about everything. And so I don't normally, when I introduce a series, I don't normally get a lot of people going, ooh, this is going to be good. I'm looking forward to this. Yeah, I want to hear what he has to say about this. I usually don't get that. But with this series, I've been getting it. And so the first 2 weeks of this year, like everybody's talking about, I'm really looking forward to the series. And then there was even like people last week were disappointed. Like, I really thought you were going to start the series. But I really liked what you had to say, but I thought you were going to start the series. And so I was getting compliments over the last 2 weeks' messages. And then I was getting compliments of people saying they're really looking forward to this series. And I'm like, honestly, I was kind of starting to I think I may be hitting my stride here as a preacher. I mean, people really like what I have to say here. And I mentioned it to my wife, people really like these last 2 weeks, and they're really looking forward to this new series. And she said, they're just tired of hearing from 1 Corinthians. So, and she's right, So whether you're tired of hearing 1 Corinthians and you're just happy to hear it's a new topic, or whether this is the topic I really want to hear about, we are starting this today, and it's called Be Still. And it's the subtitle that's getting most of the attention: Regaining Mental Health with Spiritual Disciplines. And that's getting a lot of attention for, I think, one of two reasons. One, mental health is something that a lot of us struggle with, and we want to know what the Bible has to say about it, and is there some help in the Scripture, and is there some things I can do that will help with that? But two, it's the new year, and that's the time that we're thinking about spiritual disciplines. And so even if we say, well, it's not really my mental health that's struggling, it's my spiritual health that's struggling, I really want to grow closer to God. I want to try to be more committed this year. I want to try to be more faithful this year. And a lot of times those two things go together, and we'll talk about that in this series. They're not totally separate from each other. Mental health and spiritual health go together. When you start improving one, the other one starts to improve as well in a lot of cases. And that's why this series it's interesting that it was inspired by a book written by an atheist. So Jonathan Haidt defines himself as an atheist. He defines himself as a secular Jew and an atheist. He's a professor at New York University and a social psychologist, and he's written 2 or 3 different bestsellers. But this one was the one that I was reading over the summer, called The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. And he inspired the series. And it was specifically chapter 8. And I was surprised. I didn't know he doesn't reveal his faith in the book. I had to Google that later. But in the book, in chapter 8, he gives some quote-unquote ancient spiritual practices that we could use to kind of ground ourselves in reality and kind of restore some sanity to our world. And every single one of them are rooted in Judeo-Christian values and teaching. And so that's why I was kind of surprised that he was not, practicing faith of any sort. And when I say that he inspired it, what I mean by that is I don't mean that everything in the book is authoritative and true. So several of you have told me, hey, we ordered the book. And I would tell you, if you're a parent, order the book. If you're a parent of any of those that just walked out that door, order the book and read it, or order it on Audible and listen to it. That's the way I first engaged with the book. Or a parent of any of those that walked out that door. You need to hear what he has to say, because I think what he has to say is important. And I don't mean like when you read it, you're going to say, I didn't know our pastor agreed with all this. I don't agree with everything he says in the book, because he's just a man like any other man. But what I mean by inspired is, as I was reading it, I kept thinking, I would read different parts of it and go, he's on to something. I mean, this rings true. He's right about this. Technology has rewired our brains and the way we feel about ourselves, and usually not for the better. And it's not a diatribe against all technology. He's not like saying, get rid of all technology. He's just saying, there's no denying the fact that technology has changed the way we interact with one another and the way we think about ourselves. The more we scroll, the worse we feel about ourselves. And in some sense, it's like that's backwards. You know, they were designed for connection. I mean, they were originally designed to help us connect with one another better, but it seems like the more we scroll, the lonelier we get. The more we scroll, the more anxious we get. The more we scroll, the more depressed we get. And we're scrolling more than ever before. And it did not escape my notice that I'm launching a series about some of the dangers of social media and how it's affected us on the exact same day that the most popular social media app in the world is taking a temporary pause. And some people are completely freaking out about it. I mean, go online and look. Some of you may be, and I'm please, I'm not trying to throw you under the bus here, but I mean, there are people like completely freaking out about the fact that I can no longer watch short videos by people I don't know with carefully curated content by the algorithms to keep showing me ads so that I'll stay on it as long as possible. And it's really only a day, okay? Tomorrow morning it'll probably be back. But for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about the TikTok ban, because some of you are looking at me like, what? What are you saying? But I mean, it's amazing to me that like there's people crying real tears over the fact that app's not available this morning because those things have become so ingrained in our daily patterns and our daily habits, we can't imagine life without them anymore. And 10, 15 years ago, none of us had them. But now we can't imagine life without them, especially the folks that walked out those doors at the beginning of this message. I'll let Jonathan Hyatt kind of describe the book for you. I want to read you just a couple excerpts. We're going to look at a couple of charts, but this is what the book is about. The book tells the story of what happened to the generation born after 1995, popularly known as Generation Z, the generation that follows millennials. Some marketers tell us that Generation Z ends with the birth year 2010 or so, and they offer the name Gen Alpha for the children born after that. Listen to this. But I don't think that Gen Z, what he dubs the anxious generation, will have an end date until we change the conditions of childhood that are making young people so anxious. So he kind of has a theory about why some social psychologists are talking about, sustained adolescence. They have periods of sustained adolescence and these things that are affecting a generation. It's not like something, well, you'll grow out of it. He's like, no, the conditions are present so that it continues. And here's the way he describes it. And this is a little bit of a longer reading, but just listen carefully what he says here. Gen Z became the first generation in history to go through puberty with a portal in their pockets that called them away from people nearby and into an alternative universe that was exciting, addictive, unstable, and as I will show, unsuitable for children and adolescents. Succeeding socially in that universe required them to devote a large part of their consciousness perpetually to managing what became their online brand. This was now necessary to gain acceptance from peers, which is the oxygen of adolescence, and to avoid online shaming, which is the nightmare of adolescence. Now, listen to this next part. He's describing Gen Z, but I would argue he's also describing millennials, Gen X, boomers, any of us that have kind of gotten sucked into spending way too much time on social media. Gen Z teens spending hours each day scrolling through the shiny, happy posts of friends, acquaintances, and distant influencers. They watched increasing quantities of user-generated videos and streamed entertainment offered to them by autoplay and algorithms that were designed to keep them online as long as possible. They spent far less time playing with, talking to, touching, or even making eye contact with friends and family, thereby reducing their participation in embodied social behaviors that are essential for human development. So I would, like, if you read through this book, he's talking about Gen Z. The book is about the anxious generation, but we that are not in that generation can't read it and go, that's what's the matter with today's kids. Look at how this is affecting them. We're being affected just as much. They're learning it from us. The reason that he focuses on Gen Z is because he says generations are shaped by one of two things. They're shaped by the experiences they have in childhood, like depressions or wars or national events, those kind of things, or they're shaped by the technologies that are present in their childhood, like radio, TV, internet, computers, and eventually smartphones. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. What he does is he goes on and he describes how beginning in as early as the late 80s, childhood began to shift from a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood. And how parents begin to try to eliminate more and more risk in the real world while tolerating more or more risk in the online world. Like during this period of transition from the 80s to present day, we begin to be more and more concerned about safety for our kids. And he's got some pictures of old playgrounds. So I wish I put some of those pictures up there. You remember the monkey bars and the wheeling around and all, those old metal slides? Nobody can build those things anymore. How can you possibly let kids play on something like that? Because we were trying to eliminate as much risk as possible from the real world. At the same time, granting more and more freedom in the online world. And a lot of us in this room grew up, in an age when our parents, you headed off on the bicycle and they said, be home by dark. Right? Be home by dark. And there was no location tracker on you to see where you went. There was no phone in your pocket so that they could call you and ask you where you were. They had no clue where you were until you got home at dark. And if you didn't get home at dark, well, then they might call the neighbor and say, have you seen Russ? Where is he? Parents are getting arrested for that today. Literally. Parents. There was a mom in Georgia arrested for letting her 10-year-old kid, walk to the store because reckless endangerment. And I thought the irony of it is, if she had let her kid get on a video game and talk to online strangers, or she had let her kid sign up for social media and lied about his age to get him on Instagram and let him talk to online strangers, there would be no consequences. And that's kind of what he's saying in the book. Here's his main thesis. His main thesis is that these two trends, overprotection in the real world and underprotection in the virtual world, are the major reasons why children born after 1995 have become the anxious generation. And it's worth the read, okay? I encourage you to check out the book. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about overprotection in the real world because I think that's kind of more geared to parents and how you're raising your kids. So I'm not going to get into a lot of that stuff. That's why I encourage you to read the book. I want to spend most of my time in chapter 8 of this book where he talks about the ancient spiritual practices that might help us regain some of our sanity. And these will be things like community, presence, fasting, prayer, grace, and worship. And so those are the things we're going to be talking about through this series. And we're going to spend one Sunday on each of those things. And we'll look at the verses in the Bible that pertain to them. But today, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time here. We're going to spend a little bit more time here because today is about understanding how we got here. How did we get to this point as a society? And then we're going to go to this book for the answers to how to kind of reground ourselves. So I want to show you a few charts. I know that surprises you if you've heard me. You know I love charts. So I want to show you a few charts. I showed you these before when we talked about Inside Out 2. So we're going to get a little bit nerdy for just a little while. And just absorb kind of what you're seeing here in these charts. This is some of his research. The first one is a study done by the U.S. government. And this is an annual survey where they measure mental health in teens. And they ask questions like, have you ever experienced a long period of feeling sad, empty, or depressed? Have you ever lost interest in becoming bored? Or things you usually enjoy are no longer enjoyable to you? And they determined that teens who answered yes to 5 or more of these questions were classified as having suffered a quote-unquote major depressive episode. The area in 2010, starting 2010 to 2015, that shaded area, that shows when the dramatic rise occurred. And you can see, with major depressive episodes, girls were more likely to experience those in adolescence than boys. But the increase was the same for girls and boys. 145% increase since 2010 for girls. 161% increase since 2010 for boys. And the question that he had when he looks at this research is, what happened in 2010? Why did these things go from pretty much flat to suddenly through the roof? This chart right here was the one that got his attention and really probably inspired the book because he's a college professor. And he was noticing all of these college students were coming into his classes, and like the counseling centers in colleges and universities were filling up. Like all of a sudden there's an epidemic of mental health in our country, and what in the world happened? And these are what they're defined as internalizing disorders, meaning that they are these symptoms are internal, meaning that you may not always be aware that somebody is experiencing these. They may not show their anxiety to publicly, or they may not show the depression publicly, but people are experiencing these. And you can see there was an increase in all of them down at the bottom, but the ones that went really through the roof were depression and anxiety. And again, 2010, they were relatively flat until 2010. And suddenly in 2010, you saw a dramatic increase in those, more than double-fold on those. And it had him asking the question, what is happening? What has changed? What is going on that's causing these instances to rise? One more was the anxiety prevalence by age, and this is why he focuses on Gen Z. But you can see, this is from the same survey from the first slide, but you can see how it affects different generations. And pretty much every generation has experienced some increase, except for us old folks. And I can put myself in that category now because I'm in that 50-plus category down at the bottom. That one had a slight decrease. But when you go up above, you see a 52% increase. That would be what? Millennials or Gen X millennials, kind of a 103% increase, a 139% increase. And so he says it's disproportionately affecting those who have gone through adolescence with the impacts of whatever was going on in 2010. Now, he's gotten some pushback on it, and people said, well, I can explain that chart right there. People are much more aware of mental health than ever before. I mean, my generation, we didn't talk about mental health when I was growing up. And so people are more aware of it, and people are much more likely to self-diagnose. People are much more likely to answer in a survey, yeah, I experience anxiety, yeah, I experience depression, because those things are not nearly as stigmatized as they were before. That's fair. I think that's a good point. That's probably some of what's happening. But he goes into others, and I won't get deep into these, but to show emergency room visits for self-harm are spiking through the roof again for girls and boys since 2010, significantly more for girls. Suicide rates for younger adolescents spiking for boys and girls since 2010. And he makes the point that there's something more serious going on. There's something has happened, something pivoted between the years of 2010, 2015 that caused a rapid rise of internalizing disorders, especially among adolescents. And we already had computers, and we already had the internet, and we already had phones. What was it that we already had social media in 2010? So what was it? This chart right here starts to answer the question just a little bit. All right, and this is the last one. That's my last chart, okay? It shows the adoption rate of new technologies since 1925. If I'm doing my math correctly, there's not many of you that remember the adoption of the radio. Okay, I don't know that anybody's sitting in this room going, I remember when we first got a radio when I was 1925. We didn't have a radio till then. We got one. You don't remember that. But there are stories in this room about the TV, right? There's people who tell me stories. Some of you, those of you nodding your head right now, you've aged yourself. You tell me stories like, I remember when we got a TV. I remember the first color TV we got. It was in the living room, and it was a piece of furniture. And it had the big doors on it and the big wooden thing on it. You had to get up and go flip the thing and then go sit back down. I remember. That's my parents' generation. You remember a time before TV. And you remember when TV came and there was a rapid rate of adoption for TV. My generation was the personal computer, because I can remember a time when there was no personal computer. I remember my dad brought home the first personal computer. We had an argument about it actually last week, because I said it was an Apple IIe and he said it was a Commodore 64, and I don't know who's right. But it was somewhere around the mid-'80s. And he put it in the quote-unquote computer room, because that's where it lived, because you couldn't move it around. And it had that old dot matrix printer with it. And the very first thing my dad taught me to do on a computer? How to make charts. Because that's really all you could do. You couldn't play games. You couldn't do anything on a computer. He taught me how to do a chart on Apple IIe. And so I can remember, my generation can remember a time before computers. I remember going to college and not taking a computer with me. Because what do you need one for? You're going to college. I remember going to college and not taking a phone with me. Because what do you need one for? We didn't have phones, actually, that I could take with you. We did. They were big bag phones that you plugged in the car. We called them car phones because you could not take them out of the car. But we didn't have one of those. So my generation can remember that. My girls, 25, 21, they can remember a time before social media. They can remember when social media first became a thing, or when smartphones first became a thing. Because when they were growing up, when they were little girls, they didn't have smartphones. We didn't hand them iPads. They didn't exist. So they can remember that. But all those kids that walked out that room at the beginning, and all those kids that walked out that room, can't remember a time before any of those things. They've been a part of their lives since childhood. Whether they had their own devices or not, they've been a part of their... And if you look across, the adoption of the smartphone was the fastest rate of technology adoption over any other technological advances. If you look at generations 18 to 25, 98% of them have a smartphone. And it goes down with each generation. But it was this rapid adoption rate. And that's what he says. What changed was not the fact that in 2010, we got the internet or we got social media. What happened in 2010 was everybody suddenly had access to smartphones. So we had access to the internet all the time, every day. We had access to social media all the time, every day. You used to have to log in to get on the internet, and it took 15, 20 seconds of that. You used to have to log into Facebook, so you'd only spend time when you're sitting at your physical computer. But now you got access to it all the time. You got this information overload that becomes accelerated with the smartphone. And to put things in perspective, the current generation have no idea what it's like to not have a camera with you. I mean, think about that. They got a camera with them all the time. It means if one of their friends does something stupid, they can record it. Thank goodness there was no cameras when we were in high school, right? Thank goodness that we didn't have video footage of everything stupid that we did. But now they don't know what it's like. They've got access to that 100% of the time. They have no idea what it's like to not be available 24/7 to every single person in your contacts. To not be able to reach you. Like when we went on the vacation to Florida and we drove for 8 hours, nobody could reach us. Nobody could see where we were. But they won't know that. They're always accessible, always available. They'll have no idea what it's like to not share their location with family and friends. You remember the old days, 5 years ago? Where are you? They'll have no idea what that's like because they just open up the app and they can see where you are. They open up Snapchat, Life 360. There you are. I know exactly where you're at. Right? They'll have no idea what it's like to ask for physical directions somewhere and then write them down on the back of an envelope and then use your odometer to figure out if you're making it or not. Right? No, how do you give addresses to somebody in Gen Z or below? You give them the actual physical address, and they plug it in their phone, and it tells them where to go. Right? They think it's weird. My girls are like, when I call Ma and ask her, directions to somewhere, why does she say, well, you drive down 1.5 miles, and there's this house with an old green garage, and you turn right there to the left, and then you go down 2 more houses, and you got an old bunch of old cars right there. She's like, just give me the address. It's a different generation. It's the same generation that when they call you on voicemail, they say, hey, Russ, this is David. It's 9:45 on a Thursday. I know it's 9:45. I know it's Thursday. I know it's David. I got your number. But they don't know that. I mean, it's different generations. They'll never know what it's like to not have access to the answer to every question, to have a dinner conversation with friends and go, who sings that song? And have no idea and never get the answer. Because now you just pick up your phone and go, oh, that's who sings it. They've got access to unlimited information, unlimited contacts, and it's coming at them every day. The phone, you don't even have to go look for the information. The phone's giving you the information. It's sending the notifications. Hey, somebody liked this post. Hey, somebody followed you here. Hey, somebody did this. Hey, this is going on. This is going on. Pay attention here. Pay attention here. It's force-feeding you all of these notifications, and here's the most dangerous one to me. And I'm almost done. The most dangerous one. They'll never know what it's like to not know what every person they've ever connected with, from close friend to casual acquaintance, is doing, feeling, thinking, or saying about anything and everything. And I want you to think about the weight of that, the emotional weight of that. I got to know what every single person, not people I don't even know. I got to know what they're thinking, feeling, whatever crises they're going through, whatever issues they're going through. I'm carrying the same weight of what's happening in California as what's happening here, what's happening in Israel. Like it's just constant. I don't know how to put it. I don't think we're meant to carry the emotional weight of thousands and thousands of friends. I use friends in quotations there, across dozens of platforms. Because it's just more than we can bear. Our community's gotten so large, we can't possibly handle all the emotional weight that we're feeling there, and it's causing us to think differently about ourselves, because what we do is we end up comparing our whole life, the good, bad, and the ugly, to the highlight of their lives. And we end up trying to highlight the good parts of ours so that we manage our brand so that people like us more, and we actually put real, those metrics aren't just like metrics out there. I mean, there's like we actually measure ourselves based on who likes us or who follows us or who comments or doesn't comment or who we were invited to. I mean, it's a lot to carry. And the smartphone changed the game. Not all of it's bad. You know, as soon as we're done with this message, I'm going to put a screen up that allows you to give to the church through your smartphone. Somebody called me out on that after the first service. I get it. As soon as I got done with this message in the first service, I went back and checked my smartphone because I had some notifications. It's not all bad, okay? But it changed the game. When social media became available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we started substituting online connection for real connection, and scrolling became the drug of choice. And we started spending hours and hours and hours on those screens. And for some of us, our entire social life moved online. So there's a delay. Like, kids don't even want to get their driver's license anymore. What do you need it for? I mean, it's because my whole life is online. I don't need to go anywhere. And so we've lost the ability to be fully present with the people around us. And this affects all of us, even people who aren't on social media. You go, I'm not on social media. This doesn't affect me. Yes, it does. It's affected all of us. I'll read you one last quote, and then I got a quote from Scripture. See if this sounds familiar. This is page 35. He says, I got this on the screen, actually. He says, this is why I refer to the period from 2010 to 2015 as the great rewiring of childhood. And this was, the 2010 to 2015 was when the rapid adoption of the smartphone was taking place. Because social patterns, role models, emotions, physical activity, and even sleep patterns were fundamentally recast for adolescents over the course of just 5 years. I would argue that it was recast for all generations. It just may have been a little bit slower for the older generations because we were a little bit slower to adopt the technology. But I know some grandmas that spend just as much time as some granddaughters on Facebook. Okay, and I know some grandpas that spend just as much time on Instagram Reels as grandsons, okay? And I know I dated myself by saying Instagram Reels, but it's grandpa. It's affected all of us. And again, this message, this series is not going to be a diatribe against social media. I'm not going to say you should swear off all of it and go Amish or something. It's not that. That's not what I'm going to say. It is, in the midst of using it, we got to find some way to keep ourselves grounded. And we got to find some way to maintain our sanity. And we got to find some way to maintain our connection with other people and to maintain our connection with God. And to do that, we're going to go to this book. So we're going to put this one down, and we're going to go to this book and say, what are some practices in here that Christians practice, that even before Christians were practicing? What are some ancient spiritual practices that we can practice in here that'll keep us grounded? That'll keep us focused on the right things. And this is kind of going to be our key verse for the whole thing. Psalms 46:10. Be still and know that I'm God. You're familiar with that verse. This is going to be the one that we'll probably revisit in every message in the series because there's a command there, be still. Just stop and be still. And there's a simple result of following the command. And know that I'm God. To know who God is, we got to stop long enough to experience His presence. And when we experience His presence, when we reconnect with God, when we take the time to be still, we reconnect with who God is and what He wants for us, and that grounds us in what matters most. The problem is, in today's culture, it's harder to be still than ever before. And I'm not talking physically. I'm talking mentally. Because we're carrying the weight of every notification, every like, every follow, every 15-second video. We're just, with every swipe up, it's harder and harder to stay still mentally. And so we're going to talk about what are some practices like intentional community, like presence, intentional presence, fasting, prayer. What are some practices that we can do that help us stay grounded? So that's where we're headed. Next week we're going to talk about community. And that's where we're headed to. Let me say a word of prayer, and I've got just 2 announcements, and we'll be dismissed. Father, I'm thankful for the research that Jonathan's put in here. Thankful that there are folks that are out there looking at some of this stuff and can maybe just get us to take notice for a little while to see how we might adapt and adjust. And I'm thankful for your word and its relevance, and the fact that these ancient practices are still relevant today, and probably more relevant today maybe than even any time before, because there's so much competition for our attention, and there's so much competition for our allegiance. And so I pray that you help us as followers, as Christians, to try to be wise and balanced in the way that we respond to all of these changes going on around us. It's in the name of your Son, Jesus, we pray these things. Amen.